Welcome back to In Conversation With, where we explore the latest innovations shaping the cosmetics industry. I'm your host, Siobhan. In today's episode, we're diving into the ever-evolving world of personal care. According to the Environmental Working Group, the average person uses 9 personal care products each day. For 1 in 4 women, that number jumps to 15 or more. And within just those 9 products, there can be more than 126 unique ingredients. It's no wonder then that more women are starting to ask, what exactly are these ingredients and what do they mean for the bodies and the planet? To help me answer this and more, I am joined by an incredible panel of experts. Please welcome Mallory Huron, Director of Beauty and Wellness at Future Snoops, Maggie Spicer, Founder, Source Beauty, and Joe Chidley, Founder of Reposit and Beauty Kitchen UK Limited. Welcome, everybody. Mallory, let's start with you. At Future Snoops, what key consumer shifts are you seeing in personal care space, and what do you think the biggest opportunities lie?
Well, the personal care space is perhaps the most surprising area that we've seen such massive interest and growth within. 10 years ago, consumers were not looking for ingredients like niacinamide, glycolic acid, vitamin C in their deodorant, and even sometimes some of these ingredients in their toothpaste. And so the whole skinification movement, which we've seen, the idea of looking for these advanced skincare, facial skincare level actives in all of your bodily products, whether it's body wash, body lotion, deodorant, oral care, and beyond. Consumers really just want these advanced formulations and actives for all parts of their body. So they're really seeking this out. This, of course, is being fueled by this huge consumer education movement. Consumers today are, of course, more interested than ever before in how their products are made, why they work, and how to make them work best for them. They're on TikTok. They're watching the cosmetic chemists, showing the behind the scenes. They're watching experts. They want to know it all. And this is all driven by this intense desire right now to maximize efficacy and to maximize routines. Consumers really want their bang for their buck. They really want a deodorant that's not just going to absorb sweat and cover up odor. They want to maximize their skin tone and texture and also have it be sustainable. So they really, again, this idea of the uncompromising consumer is something else that we've talked about quite a bit at Future Snoops, this idea that consumers are no longer okay with, oh, it's a sustainable formula, but it's packaged in plastic, or it's great sustainable packaging, but there's this ingredient in it that's sourced and that's unsustainable. So again, sustainability absolutely comes into play, but this is also, I think, really more so being driven by this consumer desire for advanced luxe feeling products for all aspects of their routine.
And thinking about the uncompromising consumer, Joe, as the founder of indie brand Beauty Kitchen, how are you responding to these evolving consumer expectations?
So we're in a moment where trust is the new currency, and just building on what Mallory's talked about, giving the efficacy and the true definition of what efficacy means, not just for your facial skincare, but for your whole routine. I think the consumer is now building out on that. It's not just around what can these ingredients really do for every part of my routine, but also what does it then give me in terms of the lifestyle approach that I have? And a lot of this has always come down to choice. We're seeing a major shift where consumers aren't just buying based on ingredients or claims, they're buying based on proof. So they want to trust that what you say is what you do, and more importantly, they want to know how their choices are making a difference. And that's really where Beauty Kitchen, we have been really fortunate to be ahead of the curve in lots of these areas, very much due to third-party verification marks, because that then gives that trust, because it's not just our organisation that's saying not only do these products work, but they also are an extension of what your lifestyle approach is. that might be that it's how good is it for the planet? How sustainable is it? How fairly traded or ethical is it? And I think that for me is key. One of the other areas is we as a small independent business have leaned into tools like AI, not just for personalization, but to help build trust, particularly on that post-purchase impact and ensuring that there is less waste and that we're being really specific to the current economic backdrop.
Indeed. And if trust is the new currency, Maggie, how are consumer-driven trends influencing policy and standards in personal care?
Well, I think what we've seen is that consumers really are demanding more from the brands that they're purchasing from. And there is this real push towards products that not just perform on efficacy, but also reflect the values of the consumer who's purchasing them. And this kind of started with the green ingredients. They wanted certain ingredients to be included or not included. And where this has now gone is into more sustainable ingredients. So understanding what the brand is doing on sustainability, and maybe that's evaluating their claims based on ingredients, maybe it's on social responsibility, but consumers are demanding more transparency from brands. And what this has kind of pushed regulators into doing is increasing the parameters and the guardrails around making these claims. They're called environmental marketing claims or green claims. And this is really helping marketers in a lot of ways to understand the guardrails around when you want to talk about the positive environmental attributes of a package or the product inside or even the company overall. We want to engender that consumer trust. And there has been a lot of pushback against green claims. A lot of consumers think that brands greenwash and overstate the positive environmental attributes that they have in their products. And so we really want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to provide that level of consumer trust and transparency that ideally is going to allow brands who are doing that really strong, positive environmental and social work to be able to talk about the work that they're doing in a way where consumers feel like they can trust the messaging and that they can be supporting the brands that align with their values.
Indeed. And Mallory, what emerging tech trends are you tracking at Future Snoops, and how are they shaping personal care innovation?
I think this is all about the biotech and the way that we can utilize technology to create ingredients that are making products just simply more advanced and more convenient and seamless than ever before. I don't know, maybe this is because I'm starry-eyed because we just wrapped up our coverage of In Cosmetics Global and just all the amazing innovation that came out of that show. But just the amazing innovation in terms of optimizing how formulations are put together, utilizing the best of biotech, especially to preserve nature, but also to enhance the ultimate consumer experience with that product, solving real issues through ingredient innovation. I think that's a major key where technology can be used. I think certainly we're not even close to seeing the end of what biotech can do within personal care. And I think this is an incredibly impactful space where biotech can have a real impact, because these are, as you mentioned, products that are used every day. These are the routine products. And so if we can replace and optimize even just a few of these standard ingredients, these industry standard ingredients, with better, more environmentally safe, more sustainable, self-regenerating ingredients, I think that's where tech can be a real solution.
And Joe, what role is technology or biotech playing at Beauty Kitchen in developing next generation products?
Yeah, so building on the biotech side of things, I think there is so much scope in not just biotech, but actually really straightforward ingredients to become replacements. So if we take microalgae as an example, we know the benefits of that, not just from an efficacy perspective, but also from an environmental and human element of it as well. The other aspect to microalgae is over 97% of microalgae still haven't been identified yet. And the great thing about that particular technology is that once you've identified the microalgae in its normal environment, it is relatively straightforward to be able to take that to a brownfield site and recreate that environment and grow the microalgae from there. So I still think there is a huge scope within the microalgae and marine biology, particularly that area, that not only steps and brings beauty, but it brings beauty and food together. And that, again, is a really interesting story for us as an indie brand, because it gives us the efficacy of the active ingredients, but it also gives us that story to say, not only is this ingredient doing great stuff for you, it's actually doing great stuff for the planet, and it's also a great food offering as well to complement the changes that are happening within people's diets. And I suppose that comes back to the original question of those sort of changing consumer trends. Rather than you just looking at it individually, facial skincare or body care, it's a holistic viewpoint that we're now taking around what we eat, as well as how we take care of ourselves topically as well. And I think having that interaction or interdependency between those ingredients that can demonstrate how you can do both with the same ingredient, I think is fascinating. And then really, I think for everyone, it's how do we integrate AI into not just our business practices, but how does AI really help for us to take forward an industry that is really known for being particularly wasteful, and using that to our advantage. And I think, again, that will change. Those iterations within AI will be weekly, not even monthly.
And Maggie, from a regulatory perspective, which technologies are likely to reshape policy in the personal care space?
Oh, that's such a good question. I actually think biotech is what I'm the most excited about right now. What we're really seeing in the regulatory space is an emphasis not just on environmental marketing claims and how you substantiate them, which I think is a huge focus right now, not just in the US, but definitely in the EU. So how we're getting the underlying data to substantiate when you want to make a claim that something is more environmentally sustainable than the alternative, how you substantiate that is incredibly important. And so being able to utilize a process like biotechnology to look behind the scenes of, for example, how an ingredient is developed, we know that for certain natural ingredients that consumers love, there are very few ways to source them naturally and responsibly. So in instances where we know there is an increased consumer demand, but the demand on the planet is just too great to justify, exploring options like biotechnology give brands and product developers a much bigger kind of creative toolkit to still produce the product that the consumer wants, but to do so in an environmentally responsible way. And they can create a system where they can actually substantiate the claims that they want to make in line with what these new regulatory standards are looking at. The other thing that I think biotech and these advanced technology processes can help us with is on the packaging side, because we know that packaging is one of the biggest focus areas for consumers when we think about beauty and personal care. They're very fixated on how many individual units of packaging we create. And just by the very nature of beauty and personal care, our products have to be packaged, and oftentimes in very beautiful but somewhat wasteful packaging. And so what technology is allowing us to do is explore ways of utilizing, for example, PCR materials to increase the amount of recycled inputs that are going into final packaging formats. And right now we're limited in how we can do that. There's a threshold for a lot of materials where if we put too much of it into a final packaging, the quality just won't be there, and the performance and keeping that product safe won't be there. But as we explore these new technologies in kind of material refinement, even things like molecular and enzymatic recycling, we're really trying to tackle the problem of packaging waste and encourage the utilization of more sustainable materials in packaging design. So I completely agree with what the other two ladies have been talking about. I think these types of technologies are really what's going to push us forward as an industry. and help us meet those consumer demands while also meeting the regulatory guidelines that are being developed.
So, Mallory, is sustainability becoming a key driver for product innovation?
I love what Maggie just said about packaging, because certainly for product innovation, yes, but packaging within personal care is a critical issue to make an impact onto, as Maggie mentioned, the huge amount of waste from personal care products. Again, this is a category that consumers are using day in, day out. These are routine, standard hygiene level products that consumers are using daily, if not multiple times a day. Therefore, what they are packaged in and the life cycle of that packaging itself matters hugely. It has such a greater impact simply because the average consumer is going through so much more of it over the course of their life. And so I completely co-sign everything that Maggie said. I think in here, in terms of optimizing sustainability, it's about form and function, what I spoke to before about the uncompromising consumer. So if we're going to make this category more sustainable, we're going to have to consider all angles of this problem, because there's not one single solution that's going to really solve it. Of course, biotech and relieving the burden on the environment through sustainable ingredients is one, as we just discussed, but also packaging, thinner plastics, smaller bottles. I think the era of the big plastic bottle personal care is really coming to an end, not just out of consumer desire, but out of necessity. And this is also where formulation comes into play as well. What formulations can we look to optimize sustainability? Be it, of course, many personal care products like deodorant, for example, have always typically been solids, but what other personal care products can we make as solids? What can we make as powders or tablets? How can we get consumers to be excited and adopt these lifestyle changes, which that's the kicker, because if you have a product that you're using multiple times a day, every day, throughout your entire life, how do you get consumers to change that routine? The only way you can do it is to make a product that is genuinely better and genuinely more seamless to use, and that represents even better a value add for a consumer. It's carry-on friendly, it's portable, you get more of a product for your value. So I think with the environment and the sustainability, it's such a multifaceted issue, but I think sticking to the idea of form and function, considering all aspects of a product, is really how we're going to make headway here.
And thinking about all angles, Joe, where's the balance between sustainability and innovation at the Beauty Kitchen?
So I think it's interesting that you're talking about packaging. Obviously, we've two sides to our business. We have Beauty Kitchen, which is an indie beauty brand, which is relatively straightforward to understand. But we also have Reposit, which is a system of returnable packaging that's designed with other brands, suppliers, and retailers, not for competitive advantage, but for a collective one. So we have been building an infrastructure that anyone can plug into that's the kind of systems change that turns circularity into a reality. And I've always been a big believer of that. I think we're moving away from this idea of talkative collaboration, and we're moving very much into an area of collective action. Because let's be honest, there's no one brand, however bold, can change this industry alone. We need interdependence, and that means formulating, packaging, and even marketing in ways that are open, shared, and that we have built together, and that everybody has the opportunity to generate a commercial success from. But that's a totally different way of looking at business. But that's where I do believe that especially multi-attribute, third-party verification marks, such as B Corp or Cradle to Cradle, and even Vegan Society, when we look at these certifications, a lot of them were single attribute to begin with, where they only looked through the lens of one particular aspect, which is it vegan or is it not? But I believe that certifications are going through their own evolution at the moment, and the EU regulation is definitely determining that, because it will now be much harder to become a certifying body within the EU. And although the EU isn't every region in the world, the EU is traded with every other region in the world. So everybody at some point has to adhere to it. And I think those regulations will very much play a part in reshaping how we think about certification. But what it will do, and I'm really excited about this, is it will bring competitors together to work collectively on some of these big issues that challenge not just our industry, the planet and human society at large. And I think that's, for me, what's great. To use a quote from Greta Thunberg, no one's too small to make a difference. And that's where Beauty Kitchen is a very small independent brand that's based in the UK. But because we're part of these other coalitions and collective action throughout the industry, we can share and open source our knowledge that helps to be able to get much bigger organizations to make changes, because that's where the big impact is.
Indeed, it is. And thinking about turning circularity into reality, Maggie, how is sustainable manufacturing influencing regulation and certification?
Oh, that's a good one. And I think what has been the kind of critical point in a lot of the conversations right now is where we have capacity and the capabilities to do what type of, we'll call them environmental manufacturing processes. So everybody wants sustainable packaging. They want fewer carbon emissions. They want more environmentally sound manufacturing practices. But the reality is that not every company is able to access that type of technology and those types of resources. So we talk about circularity, we talk about understanding the product's life cycle and its end of life, ideally being able to extend the end of life back into kind of a reuse, and then bringing the product and its packaging back into the use cycle. But the reality, and I'm sure Joe could probably give us some very interesting thoughts on this, is that it's not something where a brand can just go to any packaging manufacturer and say, I'd like a circular design for my product, or I'd like fully sustainable materials. It's an incredibly complex issue that requires a real depth of technical expertise. And what we're seeing now with some of the new tariffs that have been introduced is there's a real kind of push and pull happening, especially in the US market, where brands are in a position of saying, okay, I get most of my packaging components from China. Maybe I have what we'll call sustainable packaging options. So I've done a life cycle assessment. I can see that refills are a good option for me, or I 40% PCR. So I've designed my packaging to support that. And they're probably getting them from China or Vietnam. Well, with the new tariffs that are being introduced, a lot of these brands are being potentially priced out of being able to access those manufacturers. They're going to have to move to somewhere with a lower tariff rate. And there's a conversation in the US right now around you should just move to US-based manufacturing. But we don't have the technical capabilities or the capacity in US manufacturing right now to support that volume of sustainable packaging materials. So we're having a market demand and kind of access to quality materials problem, as well as larger environmental and economic headwinds. And so brands are really trying to, I think, assess how can I succeed both financially as a brand and also maintain maybe these commitments that I've made to be a sustainably focused brand in my packaging design and my product design. And what does that mean for the consumer who is asking for a number of different things, but maybe isn't able to see behind the curtain on how difficult it actually can be in practice?
So thinking about the consumer, Mallory, what regulatory shifts are you seeing and how is this shaping innovation?
I think about regulation within the personal care category, putting the massive issue of tariffs aside for one moment, because that's the obvious one that's haunting all brands right now. But something that I think is quite pertinent to how the average consumer approaches this is the idea of trust that Joe mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. I think about things like the talc lawsuit, for example, and the prevalence of potentially dangerous ingredients in this category of products that we use. Again, as I've said a few times in my responses, but again, it's worth repeating, that are used every day, sometimes multiple times a day. So this is a critical category to consider consumer safety because the potential for lifetime buildup of potentially toxic ingredients, if left unregulated, is enormous and it poses an enormous risk. And so I think things like the talc lawsuit really brought to the average consumer's attention, oh shoot, what's in my product? Is this safe? Can I trust it? This, of course, has helped drive the consumer education movement that we discussed earlier. But I think regulation is such a tricky thing because it's completely different from one market to the next. Obviously, the US continues to be the Wild West of very minimal beauty and formulation regulations. And some of the progress that has been made is being walked back. And so it's a very precarious time in terms of the beauty industry and trying to make positive steps forward in identifying potentially harmful ingredients and trying to come to some consensus of how we're going to phase them out of products or hold brands accountable. Again, it's an ever evolving issue. I think, however, some speaking to the idea of unity across the industry, I think that now more than ever, unity and cross market regulation is something that could be incredibly helpful.
And Joe, for you at Beauty Kitchen, how do these shifts affect innovation?
So for us, any shifts are always seen as a good thing. And I think as a small independent brand, although we have many pressures, yet we do have a way to responding to things in a very nimble fashion.
Indeed. And looking ahead, Mallory, what recent innovations in personal care is inspiring you the most right now?
I'm really inspired by a lot of the updates we're seeing for travel friendly personal care products. I think with this new era of digital nomadism, consumers traveling and moving abroad more than ever before, to say nothing of extremely hectic lifestyles and just day to day, hour to hour scenery and activity shifts. I think personal care is a wonderful category to force itself to adapt to this changing consumer reality. So that's what's really excited me now, the idea of how can we take these existing formats that consumers are very familiar with and make them smaller, make them carry-on friendly, make them super easy to use, mess-free, fuss-free. So that's something that is really interesting me right now. But I also would love to circle back to what we opened this discussion with, this idea of skinification and the maximizing one's routine. Consumers are really looking internally and externally to marry cosmetics, what they're doing on the outside. They want this whole body approach to wellness and to self-care. And so there's this real excitement and energy towards finding products that fit in and align with whether it's a brightening routine, whether it's matching a certain scent profile that consumer is excited about that day. Again, speaking to a category that a few decades ago was essential but not particularly exciting, it's really encouraging to see how this category has really grown in leaps and bounds by the consumer estimation. And these products are now something that consumers are incredibly excited about to create this whole aesthetically curated, matching, holistically routine.
And thinking about aesthetically creative, Joe, is there an emerging innovation that you believe could be a game changer?
So honestly, for me, it's the fact that consumers are no longer just buyers, that they're part of the system too. They're demanding better. And when brands and suppliers and customers act together, we move from intention to impact. That's the collective power I believe in, not to follow, but to build, not to wait, but to lead together. And I think for us, that's where that co-creation, everybody talks about collabs. And yes, we see collaboration in terms of licensing agreements, but I believe that actually collab from your customer base is something that we're exploring at Beauty Kitchen, and that AI will give us that power to be able to lift that from just a kind of dream within Beauty Kitchen to something that we can actually use and be successful at on a really great return on investment. Because as a small business, we don't have big budgets. But I think the power of bringing technology, not just AI technology, but technology within innovation in terms of formulation, alongside what our customers want to co-create with us. For me, I think that would be the dream.
And thinking about brands, suppliers, and consumers, Maggie, is there a policy-related shift or a sustainability breakthrough that you find particularly promising?
I think brands are doing more to understand their supply chains, and supply chain due diligence is becoming more emphasized, not just for the bigger brands, but for smaller brands. And the reason this is so exciting to me is not just because it is a good business practice and really helps brands with long-term business resiliency, but the more you understand your supply chain and take the time to really dig in past just your immediate partners, the more you can understand where you can make an impact. And for brands of various sizes, the impact they can make may really shift dramatically depending on where you're sourcing certain things and the types of suppliers and vendors that you're using. And this tends to be a much more behind the scenes topic. I haven't really seen in the last 15 years many brands take this on board as something that they want to share with their customers and really highlight the work that they're doing behind the scenes on supply chain due diligence. But what I think we're seeing now is that brands are recognizing that it is such a complex web of supply chain kind of partners that even the smallest brands need to rely on in order to succeed as a business. And so without that understanding, it's very difficult to grow and to mature as a company. So more brands are starting to dig in on this concept of supply chain transparency and traceability of ingredients and materials. And then they're finding ways of leveraging that visibility and all of that data into not just understanding their business, but also how do we find opportunities to promote our values, to share new interesting stories with our consumers and to build a better business. So what really excites me is the brands who are not just doing that from a business resiliency perspective, but are finding the opportunity and using it as a new space in which they can create impact.
And with that, I'd like to thank Mallory, Joe, and Maggie for your insights and expertise. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to In Conversation With. We look forward to exploring more topics on innovating cosmetics next month. Until then, take care and stay inspired.